Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming today. We will have Orange County Public School students that will be coming in and filling out those chairs. They are delayed in the inclement weather, and so we'll may repeat some things just to get them up to speed. These are the best of the best. I had the privilege of interacting with these folks 36 years ago, and that has informed a lot of my public life. I've learned a lot watching these folks operate. Because when it comes to leadership, you're looking at it right here. When it comes to ethics, you're looking at it also. And this is the theme of what we're discussing today, which is ethics and leadership. After I left the Senate, I started this initiative at the University of Florida, sponsored by the George A. Smathers Libraries and their dean, Dean Judy Russell. And what we've done over the years is bring different luminaries to have a discussion in front of the students. Will all of the University of Florida students that came all the way from Gainesville today, would you hold up your hand? Okay, thank you. Thanks. You've come a 2.5-hour ride on Interstate 75, so you've made quite a trip today. We appreciate that. Normally these are done in Gainesville and done in the main hall of the old library. But we figured that since we were fortunate to have a total of 10 astronauts, that we wanted to do it in a place that was convenient. So we are very appreciative that you would come all the way from Gainesville. Having done that, it was logical that we could then get students from other universities as well. University of Central Florida is here. Would you hold up your hand? All right. All right. Go Knights. University of South Florida, I understand, is here. Right there. All right. Coming all the way from Tampa. And you made the trek on I-4 at rush hour. Thank you very much. Do we have students here from Bethune-Cookman? Not yet. Okay. We would expect coming from Daytona Beach, Bethune-Cookman. And then the Orange County Public Schools, they were very enthusiastic and wanted to participate today. So let's talk about ethics and leadership. First of all, I want to tell you who these folks are. I'm going to introduce a medical doctor first. If you just hold up your hand, Dr. Ray Seddon. A mission specialist, and she is the boss of Navy Captain Robert Gibson. Hold up your hand. Indeed, some astronauts were married to each other. And Hoot and Ray, and his name is Hoot Gibson. Hoot and Ray were in the initial space shuttle class of 1978. And by the way, that's quite a story, because that astronauts used to be just white males test pilots, and thus out of the beginning of the manned space program, it was the Mercury 7, the initial 7 astronauts, all test pilots, all white males. But NASA realized that as we were getting into a spacecraft that could carry more people and was going to be more frequent in its flights, the space shuttle, NASA realized that what they needed to do was to make the astronaut corps look more like America, and thus that first class. And interestingly, the way that that was done, because there were a lot of astronauts that did not know that they could become astronauts, like women, like minorities, that needed to be encouraged. You know how NASA did it? They went and got the TV series star, Lieutenant Uhura, an actress named Nichelle Nichols, a African-American actress. And she was well known in the African-American community. And as a result, she went around to minority institutions and recruited people. And one of the astronaut commanders, Fred Gregory, told me that he, a test pilot in the Air Force, would have never thought that he would have had a chance of being accepted as an astronaut. But it was Nichelle Nichols reaching out, encouraging him to apply, that then it ended up with that class of 78 with quite a number of women in that space shuttle class as well as minorities. And so Hoot and Ray, the married couple, not then married, by the way, this is a marriage made in NASA. They were in that first class. All right, I want you to meet and Hoot Gibson, by the way, was my commander. This is 36 years ago. It was the early part of the space shuttle program. Hoot's sitting in the left seat as the commander. In the right seat is the pilot. He's the second in command. And I want you to meet retired Marine General Charlie Bolden. I learned a lot about leadership watching these two and the others on our crew. We've got 4 space shuttle astronaut commanders up here. I want you to meet another space shuttle commander, retired Colonel Brewster Shaw. Raise your hand, U.S. Air Force. And retired Navy Captain Jim Weatherby. All of these astronauts have flown multiple times. Jim Weatherby flew 6 times, 5 times as a commander. The other member of our crew that is not here today, he couldn't come from Houston, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz. Franklin flew 7 times. And so you're looking at quite a bit of experience up here. All right, on our crew, our chief engineer on the flight is Dr. Steve Hawley. Raise your hand, Steve. All of these guys, if they're not pilot astronauts, they're all PhDs. Steve Hawley, astronomy, you talk about, I can't even say the words. Also, The other Nelson on the flight, the real deal, Dr. Pinky Nelson. An astrophysicist, a high school football star, one of the guys that was trained to get into the spacesuit and go out and do the space walk. And then also on our flight, another payload specialist along with me, an RCA engineer, Bob Sinker. Okay, what I thought I'd start by, what was it that made you think that you wanted to be an astronaut? I'm just going to pick somebody at random. Pinky?
All right, so I grew up in rural Minnesota, you know, where all the children are above average, and had no idea that I could be an astronaut. I always wanted to be an astronomer. So when I was an undergraduate, I went to a little school in Southern California called Harvey Mudd College and majored in physics, and was lucky enough while I was there to get engaged in a program to teach you how to fly airplanes. So I got a pilot's license while I was an undergraduate, and then went on to graduate school, earning my PhD in astrophysics, and actually was working in Germany, and saw an announcement on the bulletin board that says NASA was accepting applications for astronauts. And so I figured nobody else would use it, so I stole it off the bulletin board and took it home. And showed it to my wife and said, you know, Susie, look at this. I meet all the qualifications. I think I'll fill this out. Send it in. And she said, yeah, go ahead. They'll never pick you. You get sick on merry-go-rounds. Which is true. And so, but it's something, you know, I had always been interested in science, in space, in flying, and it fit all the things that I thought would be exciting to do. So I filled out the application, sent it in. I was lucky enough to get chosen. So.
Dr. Ray Seddon, it was a real challenge for you because women had not broken into this crowd.
Yes.
How did you think that you wanted to be an astronaut?
Well, it was kind of interesting. I grew up in a small town in the middle of Tennessee. And I first got interested in space by watching Sputnik fly over my house a long, long time ago. My father went out in the backyard and said, I want you to see something. And we watched Sputnik go over. And he said, you're beginning to see the beginning of a new era, and it's called spaceflight. And I asked him, you know, I'm a little girl, and I said, do you think people will go into space someday? And he said, probably. And I said, Daddy, do you think I could go into space? Now that was kind of ridiculous, but I had a very supportive father, and he said, yeah, baby, I just bet you could. But of course it was a long journey because they were only taking male astronauts, so to have a female, it wasn't a very realistic sort of thing to have happen. But I ended up deciding that I probably couldn't be an astronaut, so I became a doctor. And assuming that that's what my life was going to be, you know, they weren't going to take any female astronauts, so I decided I'd become a doctor. I became a surgeon and kept hoping that maybe someday they'd take women. So I was delighted 1977 when they opened up the program to women. So, you know, I didn't think I'd get in, but I had to apply, just like everybody else up here. Sent in the long application. You had to fill out pages and pages and pages of stuff. but luckily, they decided to take women, and I was in the first group of 6 women who became astronauts. We all became really close friends. It's been a long journey. But those of us, we get to our goals in very different ways, and you just have to be watching for that opportunity to come along at just the right time.
Amen. Jim Weatherby.
Thank you. I just want to say a quick word about a teacher I had. I was in, I think, the 4th grade, and I was enthralled with the Mercury program, and I smuggled in a 9-volt transistor radio into class one day to listen to one of the missions, one of the original Mercury missions, and I got caught, and I thought I was in big trouble. But rather, Mrs. Johnson said, all right, now you sit in the back here, and she gave me a world map and a bunch of thumbtacks. Said, keep listening to the mission and plot the progress as they fly around the world. So I thought I was part of the space program in the 4th grade. 35 years later, Senator Glenn came back to fly with us, and at that time I was Director of Flight Crew Operations, so it was my responsibility to deliver a nationally televised press conference that morning, and they were very interested in how does he feel, what does he look like, what did he eat for breakfast, and it occurred to me I was doing the same thing, plotting the progress of a Mercury astronaut. But the point is, think about the value of your teachers. If they can inspire in you to achieve what you want to, there's nothing better in the world than that. So thank you very much for the teachers here.
Talk about overcomers, overcoming obstacles to achieve, both personally and professionally. I want General Charlie Bolden to tell you the route that he took ultimately to tell about being in high school in segregated South Carolina.
Well, I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and so not that far from here. And I'm a child of the South. My mom and dad were teachers, so I was blessed to live with people who did what Jim just talked about. And they were incredibly encouraging and everything, but I never dreamed of being an astronaut. I knew what astronauts were. I followed the space program, but that was not something that I was going to do. And it's mainly because of stuff that Bill mentioned and Ray talked about. There were no women, there were no people who looked like me, and so I never even thought about being an astronaut. At the age of 12, I saw a program on television called Men of Annapolis about life at the Naval Academy, and I decided that's where I wanted to go to school. Little did I know that would be a little bit more difficult than it seemed, because you had to get an appointment from someone in your congressional delegation, either one of your 2 senators or your congressional representative, and every kid in the United States is eligible for an appointment from the vice president. So starting in 9th grade, I started applying to my state senators, my representative, and to the vice president of the United States, Lyndon Johnson. My senior year in high school, November 22nd, we were on our way. I played football for my dad. I wasn't very good, but I was his backup quarterback. And he had taught us that it wasn't the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. That was our motto, and that's how we won state championships all the time. But we were on the bus going to Charleston to play for the state championship when we learned that President Kennedy had been assassinated. And so for me, my hope of going to the Naval Academy just ended, because I knew the members of the South Carolina delegation led by Strom Thurmond had made it very clear that I was not going to get an appointment from South Carolina as a young black kid. And so I was counting on Vice President Johnson. And when he became president, I knew that I was not going to the Naval Academy. My mom looked at me, the encouraging teacher, and she said, "Are you going to quit?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Is that it? You're just going to give up?" And I said, "Well, I guess not." So I got a pen and paper out, and I wrote a letter to the President of the United States, to Lyndon Johnson, and I said, "I really want to be I want to go to the Naval Academy. We've been talking for years, and I thought I was going to be able to get an appointment from you." Never heard from him. But within weeks, a Navy recruiter showed up at my front door. Several weeks later, he sent a retired federal judge around the country looking for qualified young men of color. No women were allowed into the service academies yet. And ended up getting an appointment to the Naval Academy from Congressman William Dawson in Chicago, Illinois. And that kind of started me on my way. 2 things I was not going to do. I was not going to be a Marine, not going to fly airplanes. That's all I knew when I went to the Naval Academy. And You know, in life, people impress you. My very first company officer at the Naval Academy was a Marine, and when it came time to graduate, I said, I want to be like him. So I came into the Marine Corps. Found out I did not like crawling around in the mud. My wife convinced me to go to flight school, so I did. Fell in love with flying, much to my chagrin, and never looked back, and got encouraged to apply for test pilot school. And it was there that I met the person who became my role model and my inspiration, the late, great Dr. Ron McNair, who was also from South Carolina, and we lost him on Challenger, on the Challenger spacecraft. And he came with Hoot and a few other people back for a Naval Test Pilot School reunion one summer. And I saw this black guy get out of the back seat of a T-38, and I was just mesmerized. And I ran over and I talked to him the whole weekend. When it was time for him to go back home, he said, hey, are you going to apply for the space program? I said, not on your life. And he looked at me really strange. He said, why not? I said, Ron, they never picked me. And he said, you know, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. How do you know if you don't ask? And what he did was he embarrassed me because I had forgotten what my mom and dad, as my teachers, told me, that I could do anything that I wanted to do. Anything. And so embarrassed as I was, I picked up pen and paper, sent my application in. The Marine Corps nominated me to NASA. I went down and interviewed. I came back and told my wife, boy, that was awesome. I had met people like the people sitting at this table, and I said, just fantastic. I don't stand a snowball's chance in hell of being selected. So let's go on with the rest of our lives. And then several months later, got a call and saying, hey, you still want to be an astronaut? And I said, most definitely. When do I need to be there? And that was the beginning of my time there, and spent 14 years after that. So, good.
How about that? And by the way, they're not even telling you that these pilot astronauts up here have flown combat missions. Charlie flew 100 combat missions.
I'm old.
All right, now Bob Sinker, an RCA engineer, got into the space shuttle program from a different perspective. And what in the world made you think that you could actually go and fly in space, Bob?
Actually, by the time I got picked, I didn't think I could. I had applied twice to be career with the early classes of all of these people, and along with thousands of other applicants, literally thousands, I didn't make the cut. And when I finally got into the program and met them, I understood why I didn't make the cut. In the process of doing that, RCA, I had gone as high up the RCA management chain as I could to get references. And so in the commercial programs, years and years and years ago, when the shuttle was flying commercial satellites, they could nominate one of their engineers to go along to support that if, in fact, there was room on the vehicle. It's sort of like flying standby, if you will, because the flight before ours, and I think Brewster, I believe, was the commander on the flight that deployed the first satellite, our first satellite, the flight before mine. And so the NASA crew could certainly have deployed the satellite that I went along with, but if something had gone wrong with that flight, and RCA had an opportunity to have somebody there to monitor the spacecraft and verify its health, they felt that that would certainly be beneficial, so they nominated me to go because I had been the manager of systems engineering on that. And so they nominated me, and NASA approved the selection, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I do these presentations often for schools and such. And one of the things that I do is I show a crew photo, which is a lot of the people up here, as Bill said. Franklin is not here. But when NASA approved a payload specialist, they typically would assign one of the career astronauts. The polite word is to say mentor, to mentor us, to make sure we knew what we were doing. I call them babysitters, and Charlie was my babysitter. And I couldn't have had a better mentor than Charlie and the rest of the guys in the crew. And as Bill said, I remember the first crew meeting that I went to, and Hoot ran the meeting, and I didn't know Hoot from Adam. I mean, Hoot was the commander of my flight, and this was God as far as I was concerned. But the interesting thing is in my time at RCA, I have worked for a number of excellent managers and a number of excellent leaders, and the two are different, by the way, for the record. I spent my career avoiding management. But I sat in on that first meeting, and I'm thinking, this guy's both a leader and a manager. This was cool. I hadn't worked with a lot of people like that. That's an unusual combination. So to me, the opportunity to fly was just something that I had worked for. And then I applied 2 more times after I flew to be a career astronaut, and with thousands of applicants, didn't make the cut. And then I found out, for the record, it was interesting, I wouldn't have passed the physical. It turns out I have a very slight case of lazy eye, and so that if I had made it to the physical phase, the actual getting the physical, I would not have qualified. So flying for RCA worked out very well for me, and it was an amazing experience.
And the rest is history and has brought all of us together. Now, part of being a leader is also recognizing when you make mistakes and trying to correct those mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes are fatal. And everybody up here has experienced a tragedy of immense proportions. Those of you in the audience that are old enough will remember the destruction of the first space shuttle, Challenger. And that was a shock to the nation because the space shuttle had almost, in the mind of the average American, become routine. And suddenly on everybody's TV screen, they see it blowing apart. A couple of decades later, because of mistakes that could have been avoided, another space shuttle, Columbia, in 2003, was destroyed upon re-entry coming over Texas. Everyone up here has lived through this one way or another. Brewster Shaw was the commander of the immediate flight before. Steve Hawley was on the flight commanded by Hoot Gibson immediately before Challenger. Only 10 days separated us landing and Challenger launching and blowing up. And that was a traumatic experience for the country, but it was especially a traumatic experience for us. Brewster, I'd like you to reflect on your thoughts and feelings at that time.
Administrator Nelson has already talked to us about what a wonderful thing the Space Shuttle program was, how it opened the door to non-white test pilots to fly in space, and that's a door that should have been opened a long time ago. I'm really glad that the shuttle came along. Challenger and Columbia were more failures of human judgment and decision-making and leadership than they were of hardware not performing properly. Both of those accidents, the first one, Challenger, could have been prevented by making the right decisions on launch morning. That would be not to launch because the conditions of the day were outside the known capabilities of the hardware. And we launched when we shouldn't have launched, and we all know what happened. It's a little less clear with Columbia, but decision-making, again, was the major factor in the fact that we lost the vehicle and the crew. I don't know what else to say, Administrator. You know, they were our friends. they were our compatriots, they were our teammates, and they were a great loss to the world.
Mistakes were made, the technical reasons. That morning it was so cold at the Cape. And the technical reason in those big solid rocket boosters that are like two big candlesticks on either side of the space shuttle. By the way, on the big new rocket that's over there on the pad right now, the rocket called the Space Launch System that is taking us to the moon, larger candlesticks on either side of the main core of the rocket. What happens in the joints of that rocket over there right now, 5 segments, so 5 joints. They seal it with a rubberized gasket. What they didn't pay any attention to, the management of NASA, they didn't listen to their engineers on the line. And the engineers were telling them, you've got a problem because in cold weather, that rubber gets stiff and it won't seat in that joint to prevent the blow-by out that field joint of the solid rocket. And as a result, what happened that morning, going uphill, those hot gases flowed out right into the big external tank of hydrogen and oxygen, pierced through the tank, and blew the whole thing. Now, Steve Hawley, Dr. Hawley, who is one of the best technical minds in all of the astronaut office, was on that flight hours just before and saw the perish of 7 friends. What went through your mind that day, Steve?
Well, it was interesting, I guess, because even though it had only been 10 days after we landed, I had been sent out on a public relations event, which was unusual that close to landing, but I think because we'd been delayed so long in getting off the pad, that was a commitment that had been made, and I wanted to keep, and NASA wanted me to keep. So I was actually back in my home state of Kansas for a Kansas Day event at the invitation of the governor, and I had just flown in, and the launch that morning had been delayed for a couple of hours, and so it was still on the pad when I landed, and so I had a chance to go find a place to watch the launch on TV, and of course it was an incredible shock to see what happened. Of course, we knew the crew very well, and Judy Resnick, who was on board, had been a crewmate of mine on what was our first flight on the space shuttle. And I don't know, maybe half an hour later, the telephone rang, and the guy came in and said, "Hey, NASA's on the phone, wants to talk to you." And so I went and answered the phone, and they were recalling all of us that were on the road, and I returned to Houston that morning, and later that afternoon, I think Hoot and I got dispatched to Kennedy to support what was going to be the investigation. I think for me, it was helpful to have that assignment, to feel like I was in a position to do something that would help us, first of all, understand what had happened, and then, of course, make it right and get back to operations again. So part of my post-accident trauma may have been mitigated a bit by the fact that I was allowed to participate in whatever was going to come next. So I spent several months at KSC. It was interesting. I'm sure Hoot can add to this, but it was only a short time before we knew what had happened. Not why necessarily, but the fact that there had been a burn through of the boosters. I was assigned actually to a different aspect of the investigation. I was part of the team to look at what had happened to the Challenger vehicle itself during processing for the launch. Did anything happen that could have been a contributor to the accident? I suspected within days that that wasn't going to be the case, but that was our assignment, and so we focused on doing that. And then after my time at KSC, I was assigned to support the Rogers Commission in Washington. Brewster had been there, as I recall, for some time before I showed up. But again, I think it was very helpful for me personally to feel like, you know, I can spend some of my time trying to do this for our friends that lost their lives in the accident.
And part of leadership is being able to recognize that the mistake has been made and fix it. I want to ask two astronaut commanders here who were involved with that. Hoot Gibson, who was the commander right before Challenger and who was part of the investigation. And then I want to ask astronaut commander Jim Weatherby, who has made a lifetime of getting to be an expert on safety. And how does that all tie into ethics and leadership? Hoot first.
Well, Steve has described much of it. Brewster has as well. It couldn't have been a more dismal day when we watched Challenger go down. If you think about where we had been, just a couple months before we had received our fourth space shuttle, the Space Shuttle Atlantis was finally delivered. We flew, I think, 8 or 9 launches in 1985. We were looking forward to 8 or 9 launches in 1986. We were on top of the world. All of a sudden, we descended down into the deepest, darkest hole I've ever been in. We had lost 7 of our friends. We had shattered all of our dreams looking forward. We weren't sure the space shuttle program was going to survive at that point. We certainly hoped it would. And like Steve said, it was helpful to be working on the investigation. I think Steve and I both got our phone call. If it wasn't the day of the accident, it was the next day that said, pack your bags, you're headed for the Cape. I don't know what you're going to be doing, but go report to George. Who was it? George Thomas, Steve?
George was the launch director, yeah. Cripp was actually running our part of the...
Crippen was our lead astronaut to the investigation that said, go report to George and he'll tell you what you're going to do. And so I wound up working on investigating the booster rockets and the external tank, the big orange tank. And the question that we were tasked with answering was, okay, did we have a failure because we assembled the vehicle incorrectly, or did we have a failure because it was a design deficiency? And so we had to go through literally a mountain of paperwork to look at every step of the process and figure out what went wrong. Well, it took us, Steve and I were down at the Cape until April. So we spent 2 months, 2.5 months down there doing the investigation, and we finally concluded, yes, we had assembled it correctly. So it was a design defect. Now, where we went wrong, and it's kind of been mentioned already, was management didn't want to delay the launch because we would look bad. NASA would look bad. A Marshall Space Flight Center that was in charge of the booster rockets was going to look bad. And so we overruled what the engineers were saying. The engineers said, don't launch today. Management overruled it. There's a little lesson in ethics right there. Listen to everybody. Listen to all the inputs. And we didn't. We didn't. And it cost us very dearly. And it was somewhat similar with the Columbia accident as well. So this couldn't have been a more bitter lesson for us.
In other words, a leader is a person that listens to the people he leads. Jim?
So on the first accident, Challenger, I was down at the Cape and was flying with John Young as the weather pilot and saw the explosion. My first responsibility was to go out to the scene in the Atlantic Ocean, the wreckage, and document what we saw, brought the information back to the team that was making decisions. And I had the rare opportunity to observe leaders who were making really good decisions and some that were not doing so well. 17 years later, I was pretty senior in the organization, and I became responsible for the person to go find the 7 human remains of the Columbia crew. And the part of my answer here that I want to impress on you is the true inspirational people that helped us in that recovery effort. I saw 2,000 people who were working for us, 45 different organizations, all the way from the White House down to the local area businesses, that essentially gave up their careers for 2 months to help us in that recovery effort. I was so inspired by 2,000 people who were just doing a tremendous job in really difficult conditions searching for the human remains. I specifically assigned in the search teams astronauts to lead teams when we knew there were suspected human remains, and our mission was to recover the remains with dignity, honor, and reverence. And I knew that astronauts were the ones that I trusted to do that mission, to lead that mission, even though we were going to ask them in the future to fly missions themselves up in space. But I knew they were capable of doing that, and they did just such a tremendous job. I had learned 17 years earlier what works best, and I tried to apply those lessons. I want to speak a little bit more generically now, and I'll say that in 40 years of working in dangerous businesses, which I've absolutely loved, by the way, but it's not the danger that I like. In fact, I really don't like adrenaline when things start to go wrong. I love being in control. But what I've learned is that anytime an organization has an accident, and I've seen many of them, large scale, smaller accidents, it's always one of the same 10 things going on in the organization that leads to the disaster. Who Senator Nelson have mentioned a couple of times now. Number 3 on the list, by the way, 5 of them are on the technical side and 5 of them are on the social side of an organization. They've mentioned number 3 on the list is that leaders, when they stop listening to, engaging with, or caring for their people, you might be headed for disaster. The other 9 I won't have time to get into. I did write about them if you're interested in that. But let me close with a positive side. So in those 40 years of observing leaders, I've seen that leaders who are really successful in dangerous activities, in hazardous environments, they do 3 things differently than other leaders who are leading people who may be very good leaders in the financial industry or areas where you don't have physical risk. They still have risk and the company still may go under. But if you're dealing with situations where people can die, they do 3 things differently. And I think we can all learn from what these leaders do. The first is intense commitment to the mission. They really understand the mission, and they understand the mission is greater than maybe even the individual company or certainly the people that are in the company. And that's what I saw in the recovery efforts of the Columbia, was intense commitment to what we were trying to do, recover the crew with honor, dignity, honor, and reverence. If you can find, as students, when you go out into the world, if you can find a company that has a mission that you agree with, and you have your own set of values and your own principles, and do not violate those values and principles, hopefully you can find a company that agrees with your values and principles, sign on with that company, be part of that, and understand the mission and be really committed to the mission. The second thing these leaders do that is really important is they care for their people. And it's not because the people are helping us to complete the mission, it's because we really care about the people as individual contributors, and I want you to self-actualize and be the best that you can possibly be. So as a leader, I'm really interested in your success, and I'm helping you to succeed, and I'm trying everything I can to help you succeed. That's the kind of leader that you will follow, even in a dangerous environment, and can trust. The third thing they do that you see that's much different than other leaders is intense competence, and I mean this in the sense of mastery. They're really good at what they do. They understand the technical side. They understand the people side and how to communicate with people. And I'll tell you that finally, it takes great systems to launch people to the moon, but it takes great leaders and great people in the organization to bring them back when they have an explosion.
And coming back as he, yeah, let's applaud Jim Weatherby. Coming back, who described it as a deep, dark hole of funk that everybody was in. I want to ask Steve and Pinky. Actually, something came out of that, and you all decided to try to change everybody moping around. Tell what happened, and then we can tie it in what's going to happen tomorrow night.
Oh, Steve.
I was in the audience.
Okay, so, as Jim described, it's the people that are important. And after the Challenger accident, things have basically ground to a halt in terms of the regular operations at not just the Johnson Space Center, but all over NASA. And morale was pretty low, and that included the flight operations groups, the astronauts, and all of the thousands or hundreds of wonderful, that time, young engineers and people who supported us and trained us and taught us what to do. And so we decided to have a party to try and raise morale. I don't know whose idea it was. Was it Sonny's idea?
I think it was Sonny's.
Yeah.
Sonny.
And you'll hear about Sonny later. So we rented a facility a little bit outside of the Space Center and decided to have since you could see we've all been around a while, we decided to have a 1950s party.
A sock hop.
A sock hop.
It used to be a sock hop.
They wouldn't know what that means. And so we did, and one of the things we decided to do is we said, well, we should have some music. And Brewster and Hoot and I are guitar players, and we had hung out together some in each other's living rooms, embarrassing our wives playing music. So we decided we would make a rock and roll band and entertain the troops. But we needed a drummer, and we heard a rumor that one of the astronauts had a drum set, which was the only requirement for for participating in the band, and that was Jim Weatherby. So we got together and we learned a few songs, and we played together, and then we decided that we weren't quite complete. We needed a keyboard player. So Steve had a keyboard, and
Actually, I didn't, but I said I was willing to buy one.
Well,
was
and
good
I didn't have an electric guitar at the time, but I went down to the pawn shop in Webster and I bought one.
yeah, so we played together, and to great critical acclaim, and and have been playing off and on ever since. Actually, we're playing Saturday night with the orchestra here in town. So go ahead, Steve.
So wait, one of the great things about this band called Max Q is that it still exists. And it's an all-astronaut band, and current astronauts in the astronaut office who are eligible for spaceflight make up the members of the band. And so that band has persevered from 1987 to now, and I think that's probably the biggest contribution.
So,
Yeah, you, tell them where the name came from.
Oh, okay. Well, where the name came from, and I'll mention Brewster's wife. Brewster's wife had a suggestion for what we should name the band. And she said, why don't you call it Fantasy, because that's what it is. Well, we decided that wasn't quite what we wanted. And so we got to thinking, now the name of the band is Max Q. Max Q. Okay, well, during a shuttle launch, when the shuttle was passing through the region of the highest dynamic pressure, which is the engineering symbol for which is Q, and it's Q equals 1/2 rho v squared. So it's the highest air pressure against the vehicle. And what's happening at that point? It's 45 seconds or so after launch. There's lots of noise, lots of buffeting, lots of vibration. There's no music, and we said, hey, that's us. So we named the band Max Q. So that's where the name came from.
And Max Q, the original Max Q, which is right here, is going to play Saturday night with the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra backing them up. And I want to introduce you to the president of the Orlando Phil, Mary Palmer. Where are you, Mary? There she is. Now, you've noticed something about these leaders. They all have a sense of humor. And that is especially important being a leader in this high-stress environment of an astronaut. Who wants to tell how that is actually therapeutic for what you do? Dr. Seddon?
Repeat the question.
Is humor therapeutic living in a high-stress environment of being an astronaut?
Absolutely. You know, the women in the original astronaut class, there were 6 of us, had to take a lot of ribbing. And, you know, it's one of those things that you figure out when you're a woman in a group of mostly men, is that they're going to play jokes on you. I can remember we had a ladies' locker room. You know, when the women got to NASA, they said, oh, there's a locker room. Oh, well, that's a men's locker room. We'll have to have a ladies' locker room. So, you know, sometimes the names they put on the lockers were funny and this, that, and the other. But one of the guys, you know, thinking, oh, this will be funny, put a snake in Judy Resnick's locker. So when she opened it, a snake jumps out. But we had to, you know, we had to realize that we were going to get kidded, and if you were going to get upset about that, you weren't going to fit in very well. So there were lots and lots of practical jokes that happened to us along the way, but, you know, we had to learn to laugh at it and usually do something back to them. But, you know, that made everybody have fun. And, you know, you learned that you had to, as women, we had to be able to get along with the group. We didn't want to be outliers. We didn't want to be fussy. We wanted to, you know, to fit in. And I think that's one of the things that we really enjoyed doing, is becoming part of this mostly male group as women. And I think that that's one of those things that you have to realize, that if you're a woman in a group of mostly men, you have to be able to take the kidding and really throw it right back at them if you get a chance.
So, Dr. Steve Hawley, who has one of the quickest wits of any human being, who has been known for some real just zinger one-liners. But so our crew, Columbia, 61C, we go to the launch pad the first day. We're scrubbed. we end up going 4 scrubs, meaning you're in, you're strapped in, you're ready to go, and then the mission is canceled for one reason or another. And this lasted over the better part of a month. So on the 5th try, we figured that Steve Hawley was the jinx. So tell about that, Steve.
Well, you actually have to even go back to my first flight because we had a hard time getting off the ground then, too.
Tell them what you said that day.
So we had a launch date in June of '84, and we went out to the vehicle, got on board, counted down to T-minus 20 minutes, which is a place in the countdown where you hold on purpose for 10 minutes. Coming out of the hold and counting down, our commander, Hank Hartsfield, was supposed to take the backup flight computer to run, and when he threw the switch, it didn't go to run. So we sort of knew we were out of business that day. The KSA team was heroic, and they came out overnight, changed the computer out, and gave us a shot the next day. And so we counted down again, came out of the T-minus 20 minute hold. Hank took the switch to run, the computer went to run. Life is good. Count down to 9 minutes, which is the last built-in hold. Come out of the 9-minute hold, countdown. Now there's some places in the countdown between 9 minutes and launch where you can hold, but you don't plan to. The last one is at 31 seconds. Once you get inside 31 seconds, you can't hold. You could scrub, but you can't hold. So as we pass 31 seconds and counting, our commander, Hank Hartsfield, says, "Well, gang, we're going now unless something really bad happens." So we get down to 7 seconds and the engines start, and we get down to 3 seconds and the engines stop.
Not good.
And I'm thinking, I guess that's what he was talking about. So we're swaying back and forth on the launch pad from the impulse of engine start, and we had some emergency procedures to execute. And then we were sitting there kind of listening to the conversation, trying to take in what had happened and what was going on, and if the ground control team needed us to do anything. And after some period of time, I'm lying on my back, and the overhead windows are over my head, and I could look out, and I could still see the pad. And in our jargon, MECO stands for main engine cutoff, and it normally happens 8.5 minutes after launch. So I decided to try to break the tension by looking over my shoulder and then telling the crew, "Gee, I thought we'd be a lot higher than this at MECO." I didn't know till years later that Mullane wanted to punch me out. So after we exited the vehicle and got back to our quarters, Hank had to do a press conference. And during the press conference, he mentioned what I had said, and so that kind of stuck with me for the rest of my career. On my last flight in 1999, on the first attempt, we got down to 7 seconds and scrubbed the launch, 200 milliseconds before the engine started. And I've been asked over the years, well, did you have another quote? And the answer is yes, although nobody knows about it because my commander, Eileen Collins, didn't have to do a press conference. But the quote was, and I'm paraphrasing, "I'm getting too old for this stuff." So, yeah, I always thought that, oh yeah, so Bill's reference initially was, okay, so now by the time we get around to 61C, I've already had 3 scrubs, and we've had, I don't know how many more before.
We had 4, and we're on the 5th try.
And so I'm beginning to think, it could be me. And so I thought that perhaps if the orbiter didn't know it was me, we might launch. And so I know I talked to Hoot about it. I don't know if I talked to anybody else, that I had this plan to disguise myself. And so I showed up at the White Room. I guess Hooter told me it was okay. I showed up at the White Room, and I had gray taped over my name tag. And I was wearing a Groucho Marx disguise. And it worked. We actually launched that day.
So what you're seeing here is the characteristic of leaders that can talk to any situation, can react to any situation in a very professional manner, in a usually dignified manner. A name of an astronaut was mentioned earlier, named Sonny Carter from Georgia. He is revered among astronauts. And I want one of you who knows Sonny Carter to tell, why is he revered?
Sonny Carter was one of those magnificent people that was good at everything he touched. He was wasn't he a professional soccer player?
Professional soccer player.
Professional soccer player. If you wanted a real challenge, go for a run with Sonny Carter. You're going to be challenged.
One thing, the fact that he was a professional soccer player is not a big deal. He was a professional soccer player while he was going through medical school as a student at Emory University Medical School. So he was playing professional soccer while going through medical school.
Well, good point. That was just one of his many accomplishments. He also was a test pilot. He had flown jet fighters. Sonny could do anything. He was just brilliant. And at the same time, it was a real challenge if you were going to go run with Sonny. But over and above all that, he had the kind of personality I wish I had. Right, Ray? So do we. He had the kind of personality that everybody loved him. Everybody loved Sonny. We lost him in a tragic airliner crash. So here was an astronaut who had gone to space successfully, flown jet fighters, flown flight tests, and had done all those things. And he wound up dying in an aircraft crash. But it was, I want to say it was the personality that made him the great person that he was. There wasn't anybody that didn't just dearly love Sonny.
Okay, we want to save some time for the students to ask questions. We have some mics being circulated, and while y'all are lining up for those mics, I want to close out the discussion up here by you all commenting on the teamwork that is so necessary in a high-stress environment that is very dangerous, and the position of a leader in making that teamwork work.
I have about a 15-second description of it. Whenever I formed up a new crew as the commander, we would sit down for our first discussion together, and I would start off by saying, okay, you guys and gals, we are going to live or die depending on how we all perform our task on this mission. However, if we're not having fun while we're doing this, we're doing something wrong.
That's a pretty good summary, all right?
I would just like to,
Yes, thank you, Ray.
I'd like to mention one thing. You know, we're talking about aviation here, but I ended up being a surgeon, and it became really obvious to me that NASA was doing some things about teamwork that could be applied to the healthcare professions. So if you're a surgeon, you've got a team, and you have to learn how to run that team, how to keep that team from making mistakes. So teamwork is not just flying space shuttles or jet planes. Teamwork can come about in anything you do in life. If you're working as part of a group, you better make it a team.
Bob Sinker, you and I were the outsiders that came into this professional world.
Yeah.
How did you work it to fit into the team?
I didn't. No, God's honest truth, I did not. I was going to say, particularly after the Challenger accident, I got a lot of attention back in my hometown about what I had just done and how did I feel about it and what was my reaction. And while you've heard the people who lived with this on a day-to-day basis talk about the mistakes that were made, and clearly there were, the thing that impressed me the most about the whole process was the teamwork. There were people there at NASA who would have given their eye tooth to do what I was about to do. And they made me part of the team. The guys here at the table, the crew techs, the doctors, the food technicians, every one of them was there looking out for me. And this goes to what Ray and Hoot said. We're all together. And so they absorbed, if somebody came in from the outside, Bill and I, we were made as part of the team. And it's funny because I've had this conversation with school kids and my wife, and we can learn from everyone. One of my wife's favorite stories is how she helped me fix the car. Because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. And so I couldn't blow off what she was saying, even though she doesn't know anything about cars. But in that particular instance, her observation was spot on, and I was doing something stupid. And it would be very easy as an engineer to put blinders on and say, go away, babe, you don't know anything about cars. But you got to listen. And that's what I found at NASA, was the incredible teamwork that goes into the whole process.
The other mark of a leader, listen. Listen to your people. And to do it with humility. Okay. Who has the mic? Introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. I can't see you.
They're coming.
Okay, good.
Hello. Just a question for everybody as we're talking about leadership. I wanted to ask, as a leader, when you come down to a decision, whether it be split-second decision or a long decision, what is it best to think it out and to follow the logical thinking, the process, or listen to your instinct, listen to your gut, even if it doesn't make sense?
Would you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, my name is John Finkston. I'm a senior undergraduate aerospace engineering major at the University of Florida. I've been studying aerospace engineering, but also this is more, I don't really want to get technical, so this is more of a life question. When making decisions in leadership, because you know that can carry you out.
Okay.
There is a law. There is a law known as Hoot's Law. And I'm going to take the time to tell you about Hoot's Law because I am the source of it. Going back to what Bob said about being a team player or whatever, I was really struggling to get ready to go fly. I didn't think I was going to get ready, and I went to Hoot, I think about 6 months out, and I said, I can't, this is just too much. I can't learn all this stuff. And, he said, hey, calm down. Everybody goes through it. It'll come to you soon. And he was absolutely right. It was like the light bulb went on because the shuttle was incredibly complex. So shortly after that, I wanted to demonstrate to my crew my prowess, how good I was. And all of our simulator sessions were disaster training. I think we had twice that we saw what it was going to look like going to space and what it was going to look like coming back. And other than that, it was all disaster training. And we were having a launch session one day, and right off the pad, we lost an engine. An engine went out. And the diagnosis that I made was that we had lost one of our many electrical buses that had caused the main engine controller to go down and had caused the engine to go out. And so I looked at Hoot and looked across Steve, and I said, hey, we've got an essential bus failure, I'm going to go ahead and isolate the bus, take it off the line so we don't short out another engine. And everybody went, okay. Didn't ask anybody to look at anything because frequently problems in the shuttle were data. It wasn't a real thing. And so I reached over and grabbed the switch that I thought was the right one, and I turned it off, and boom, it got really quiet in the simulator because I had shut down a good bus that took down another engine. And, we were not going to get to space. And so we sank gently into the Atlantic Ocean and died. And as we're laying there, simulated dying in the ocean, Hoot reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Charles?" And I knew I was in trouble. "Did I ever tell you Hoot's Law?" And I said, "No," sheepishly, "No, Hoot, you did not." And he said, "No matter how bad things get, you can always make them worse." So my response to your question is, unless you're flying a high-performance jet or some real high-performance machinery that is going to blow up in the next second, there is always time to consult with somebody else to get a second opinion and make sure you're right. And we made a rule after that I carried through every flight that I had from then on. We would never do anything alone. We would always have two sets of eyes that would look at it because we could always make things worse if we did a split-second decision on something. So don't know whether that helps you or not.
Well, Charlie's leaving out part of the story too, and the reason that I came up with that law, that rule, was that I had killed us in the simulator because I was in a big hurry to do something, and I reached across and I flipped a switch and I shut down all 3 engines with one switch. It was amazing. Commanders can do that kind of thing. But we came up with a rule that any switch which is an irreversible step, I'm going to put my hand on the switch and say, I'm going to flip this switch. Somebody else on the crew has to say, I see it and I agree. Once in a while, I put my hand on the wrong switch just to see if they were really looking. And Stevie one time put my hand on the wrong switch and he said, no, not that one. He said, you do that just to torment me. So we came up with that rule. So yeah, rushing is what gets you in trouble.
So the principle is consult with others instead of just making decision yourself. Now there may become a time as you've consulted and there's a division of opinion. And ultimately you as the leader have got to make the choice. But then you've informed yourself with all the different options.
Could I add one
Would
story?
you please?
To back up the point you just made. My very first ascent simulator run for my very first shuttle mission, what the training team will typically do is give you a normal run. So you can learn crew coordination, you can work on the ground calls, you can look at the displays and see how they change as you go towards MECO. So it's supposed to be just a FAM run. We died. And the reason we died was because we're flying along and we're getting well up into our ascent when our commander turns his head to the right, makes some expletive, reaches over and punches off all the engines. And what had happened was, yes, it was supposed to be a normal run with no malfunctions, but he was an experienced astronaut, and so the training team said, we'll give him just a nuisance malfunction. And so they biased his velocity tape. And he looked at it, and he suddenly saw we were going faster than we should be for main engine cutoff, so he executed main engine cutoff.
Just slow down.
And, I'm going, well, this is my first simulator ride, so what the hell do I know? But Henry was a great commander. But on that day, he didn't ask any of us, our pilot had a velocity tape too. I learned a lesson as the flight engineer. I can see both of them. So, okay, my job's going to be, I'm going to make sure that they agree, and if they don't agree, I'm going to say something. But, yeah, so on that day, he took unilateral action, and once again, we're in the water. I spent a lot of time in the water in training.
Okay. We've got a number of students lined up. Let's get your question in, and let's get a short answer. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Christian Sampson. I'm from the University of Central Florida, and I'm an aerospace engineering major. The question that I had for you guys, I'm sure you guys have probably experienced it through all of your different backgrounds, but did you guys ever have to deal with imposter syndrome in a way where, like you didn't feel like, you're up to it, even though, like, you're selling yourself short, and even though you do actually have a lot of the experience you need, and how did you also overcome it?
I never overcame it.
Exactly. I don't think you need to. I think it's good. I suffer from the imposter syndrome incredibly, but I think it makes me do better. So,
Explain the definition.
Oh,
of
the imposter syndrome, as he said, is you just don't think you belong where you are because you're around all these incredible people. And I told you all from the very beginning, I didn't think I belonged in Houston, among these incredible people that I met during my week. But you have to convince yourself that you do belong. For women and minorities, I tell people all the time, don't waste your time trying to explain to somebody why you're there. Just do your job and do it well. And people will come along. You are not going to convince people not to like you or to hate you for some other reason, so don't even waste your time doing it.
Next question, over here.
Hello, my name is Conrad Wyrick. I'm a third-year mechanical engineering student at the University of Florida. This is a question for Hoot. Mr. Bolden mentioned that you were able to encompass the qualities of both a leader and a manager. How do you think you were able to combine such qualities so well? And what advice could you give to those trying to embody those qualities within themselves?
Well,
Okay.
I would just say before he answers, that's what this whole discussion has been about. But go ahead, a
Sure.
short answer.
Well, I'll tell you a story. After my 4th space shuttle launch, NASA had a big surprise for me, and they named me chief astronaut. All of a sudden, I'm astronaut number 1. I'm the squadron commanding officer. 2 thoughts occurred to me. First one was, oh, wow, I'm absolutely thrilled, because now I get to be the leader of the astronauts. And there's a big difference between a leader and a boss. I get to be the leader of the astronauts. Second thing that occurred to me right after that was, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm smart enough. I had 35 highly experienced test pilots. I had 10 medical doctors. I had a number of PhDs. Master's degrees were a dime a dozen in this group. I said, I don't think I'm smart enough to do this. So I'm going to have them tell me how to do it. So I'm going to ask their inputs and take all their inputs. Bill referred to it. I'm going to make the final decision, but I need all these inputs to help me do the right thing.
That is a universal principle of leadership, of good leadership. Over here.
Hi, my name is Andrew Salaya. I am an IT and aerospace double major at the University of Central Florida. My question is there any changes from the space shuttle to Artemis now in NASA's leadership and culture that you are a fan of or you think is a positive improvement? And the second part of my question is, would any of you rush to get on Artemis, Dragon, or Starliner right now?
Well, basically, we're too over the hill to be on.
No, that's not true. Some of us would go.
One of the big factors that's going to make us much more successful is NASA's administrator, Bill Nelson.
So it was the Apollo generation. Now it's the Artemis generation. And we're going back to the moon. And in 2025, when we land for the first time, by the way, this first one in 2 months is launching. It's not going to be crewed. It's the test flight. Then in 2 years, we send a crew of 4 that will orbit the moon and return. The third flight, we go into lunar orbit, we transfer into a lander, And on that crew will be the first woman to land on the moon. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Dimitri, and I'm a senior mechanical engineering student from University of South Florida with just some passion towards astronomy, I can say. And I have a general question for every single brilliant person here. What stays in your mind as the greatest adventure you had throughout your time at NASA?
Well, I can't let every one of you answer that, so who wants to be one? Brewster.
The way the Earth looks from orbit is something that every living human being has the same right to see. We are just hugely fortunate that we've been able to have that experience. But seeing your planet, your home, the only home we're going to have probably ever, from that vantage point, and seeing what we do to it, it just makes you feel like we need to be doing a better job of taking care of it. The difference between Mother Nature and human beings is so very, very apparent from orbit. Mother Nature doesn't do straight lines. Human beings do all these straight lines all over the planet. You can see all that stuff. You can see with the naked eye, looking out the window, you can see the pyramids, the Great Walls. You can see the runways at Houston Intercontinental. You can see all the things that human beings have done to the Earth. And so you can see how broadly space we are on the planet of the Earth. And I will tell you that the feeling, personal feeling for me, the first time I got to see that Earth was, my God, every other human being should see this. How lucky, how lucky am I to be having this experience? And so many of us dedicated our careers post-flying to helping as many other human beings get the opportunity to fly in space and experience that as we possibly could. And I think that's a noble goal.
That's as well said as I've ever heard it. For me personally, I became more of an environmentalist when I went into space, for exactly the reason that Brewster said. And that has informed my public service. Not only the relationship with these people, watching them as mentors on leadership, but what we actually did and what we saw as you look back at Earth from that perspective. I'll just tell you quickly, as a politician, I look back at Earth and I did not see political division. I didn't see racial division. I didn't see religious division. All of the things that bother us here on the face of the earth. What I saw was we were all in this together. And that has informed my public service. Okay, over here.
Hi, my name is Sky Saunders. I am a systems engineer with Lockheed Martin and a master's student at UCF. My question is a little bit more serious. So the rules of engineering are written in blood. And one thing that I wanted to know if you guys had any advice, I know, had any advice for those that any of the brilliant minds in this room may find themselves in a situation where they have to prevent something like the next Challenger or something similar, and how they could get somebody to listen. Because I'm sure everyone here will listen, but they may not be in the position to make the decision.
I'd like to take a shot at that. One of the things that Jim mentioned earlier, and I had never heard this, the 3 rules of the people who are leaders in these situations, and we look at the accidents. One of the things that, as an engineer, you will wind up doing, whether you're aware of it or not, is risk management. There are formal organizations as part of any engineering accomplishment called risk management. where you try to quantify and look at specific things and say, okay, is it serious? How serious is it? What can I do to mitigate against it? And these kinds of things. And that's a formal part of the process. But independent of that, every engineer sitting at his desk is sitting there evaluating risk. Will this break? Will it work? If you're fortunate, and most of my career has been spent on commercial communication satellites, the downside is you're going to take out HBO for a half an hour, and I've done that. But where lives are involved, obviously it's a much more serious problem and a serious issue. But Jim's third rule is very much what I had never thought of, and it's the competence of the individual. And if I've been modestly successful at my career, one of the things that people tell me is I'm real good at knowing what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And as most engineers, I'm not really very versed in the arts and the classics, but the one thing I remember from high school Shakespeare is to thine own self be true. You have to look at your competence and your knowledge base and what you know, and if you have a risk that you feel is really dangerous, you have to speak up and act on it. If you have a nagging itch that says, that doesn't make it, you have to evaluate and you have to make the decision, okay, is this just a nagging itch because I want to do it my way? Or is this just a nagging itch because I don't know and I need to do that? And then you have to go seek help. You have to go talk to your peers. You have to go elevate it up the management chain. You have to let people know. And that's all based on your evaluation of your knowledge base. And that's the competence. And the only person who can truly evaluate that is you. And the other person who said something about what if you don't feel you're up to it, you have to have, you're part of a team. You have to look at the people who put you in a position and you say, I trust their judgment, so if you think they think you can do it, then you go with that. And if you have questions, you got to pass it up the stream. You have to.
Somebody asked about a change, and it's important. You asked about a change in NASA, in what we do. After Challenger, you know, the safety division they were silent. There was no safety division per se prior to Challenger. And after Challenger, we put in a policy that anybody can stop a process or a launch, anybody. And we had that happen any number of times where there was one person, and I remember one time it was a person who wasn't even in the regular flow of stuff, but had a real concern about whether or not we're going to burn the vehicle up on reentry, because we had a vehicle that had a thermal blanket that had folded back on a pod in the back of the vehicle. The decision to bring the crew back without doing anything was made after that person had had an opportunity to plead their case. We had had people go into test chambers and everything else and demonstrate that we understood what his fear was, but here's why we feel confident that everything's going to work out okay. But one person today in NASA can stop something by saying, we should not do this. And that didn't happen, I don't think, prior to Challenger.
And that will happen today as we go into this new Artemis program going back to the moon. I have the final decision on go or no go, but anybody in the chain can say stop, and you just have to do it. And that's part of leadership. What Bob said, be authentic. Know what your own limitations are. Don't try to paper over that you're something that you're not. And that's the part of collegiality, of bringing people together and being a leader. All right, we're going to invite the press to come on down and start setting up. I'm going to take 2 on this side and 2 on this side, and then turn it over to the press for their questions.
All right. My name is Mary Zaire. I am from Trinity Prep High School. And I think one of the underlying themes of this panel has been leadership. And I believe that a large part of leadership comes from sustainability. And I'm sure you'd all agree with me in that, we have to care about the environment and about sustainability. So my question is, what has NASA done and what is being done to minimize the harmful impacts of rocket launches on our environment?
Well, I suppose I will take that. First of all, if you're referring to putting carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, indeed, what is emitted by a rocket launch is de minimis compared to the carbon dioxide and methane that are being emitted from other sources. Exhaust of automobiles, the methane generated in agricultural production, the pollutants that go in the sky because you're burning dirty fuel in producing electricity. We are at an inflection point now on what we're going to do to be good stewards of what we have on this planet. And that is stop polluting the planet. So, but it's also a balancing of risk. And so would the de minimis pollution that occurs from a rocket launch as compared to all this other pollution that we can address easily, if you stop this rocket launch, what are we sacrificing? Our knowledge of who we are and where we are and what we came from. For example, the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope, which is 1 million miles from Earth, that's going to look back and capture light that has been traveling for 13.5 billion years. The light from the very formation of the very first galaxy after the whole thing started, the beginning. I think that's valuable to us because that telescope is going to look at one of these exoplanets and it's going to be able to evaluate, is there a habitable atmosphere in that planet circling another sun, another star? That's part of understanding who we are and where we came from. So you always have to evaluate and weigh one against the other. Okay, over here.
Hi. First off, I just want to say you guys look exactly like your photos. So.
From what year?
The ones in the flyer, so way back. So, my name is Maria. It's such a pleasure to be here. So for the last week, I've been like waking up in the middle of the night, like, oh my gosh, I have a question for these guys. I have to write it down. Just wake up. I'm like, questions. Anyway, so I've been writing this down, and my favorite one is, so what does it take? You know, you guys were from like some of the first generations of astronauts, and you've seen and developed this program. So what does it take for the next generation? Like, what experiences are important or qualities for the next generation of astronauts to have?
Somebody want to talk about education?
What do you want to see?
Sure.
You're the educator, yeah. Dr. Pinky Nelson.
So when people ask me, how do I become an astronaut? It's not the kind of thing you can just become, right? But I tell folks is that what you can do is become the best that you can at what you're most interested in, what your passion is, and if that leads to the opportunity to apply to become an astronaut, that's great. The characteristics of people who are going to carry out this high-risk, high-tech, endeavors in the future is not much different than what we have today. We'll need folks who have test pilot experience, because flying is a different environment than almost anything else. We're going to need people who can take really high-tech experiments up and do them well and make them work. So it's not, there is no one small list of characteristics. And again, if you want to carry out a successful flight, you need to put together a team that's going to have over the different folks, the skills and the knowledge that you need to pull it off. So there isn't one that says be the best. The other characteristic I tell folks is that you have to be the kind of person who really knows who they are and what they can do, right? So confidence in your own knowledge and skills, but also the willingness to be a team member. So you have to in some sense be really self-confident, know how good you are, but at the same time know that sometimes, that all the time, you have to work as a team member. So these two things really go together. Your education you can get, you guys are getting the education you need for that. Just keep it up.
Okay. Final question over here, and I don't see the press, so would you all come on down and start setting up down here? So, because we're going to have you ask the questions in front of the students. All right, go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Karina Giordano. I'm a junior from Trinity Prep. I just have a question about spaceflight. What is the experience of ascent and reentry in the shuttles like, and what did you take away from it?
Who wants to take it?
Well, you know, as someone who didn't have vast experience in flying, ascent and entry were both amazing because it's very hard to simulate that, and certainly being weightless was really hard to simulate. So when we, got on board and you thought you knew what was going to happen, but then, it happened and it wasn't quite what you thought. But you had to figure out what that was going to be like, and certainly that first flight was there was a big learning curve on, okay, I didn't realize that suddenly, we launched and the sky turned black, and oh yeah, you're above the atmosphere. So things look very different. And certainly on entry, you hear about, well, you're going to feel like you're flying through a blowtorch. Well, because the shuttle would heat up on reentry. And, you think, okay, I guess. But, when suddenly you're in this little vehicle and you're pretty well protected, but all of a sudden you look out the window and you're aware of the fact that if there's a hole in this thing somewhere, I'm probably going to just poof, and be gone. So, you had to experience that. And certainly, being weightless, there was no way to do that. Everybody thought you had a weightless room on the ground. Well, no. When you first get up there, you have to figure it out. Because, my first job on orbit was to unstrap and go make some computer inputs on a panel behind me. So I floated back there and I thought, okay, and pushed the buttons and I went the other direction. So, there was such a learning curve, once you got to orbit, that, in your first flight, you certainly weren't very good or very efficient about what you were doing. But, it's learning as you go in just about anything.
Okay. Thank you. Last question over here.
Good morning. It's great to see all of you here this morning. My name is Edwin Cruz. I am a sophomore at USF as a math major and astronomy minor. And my question goes more into about your future plans, as in, when you make a future plan, how do you feel when someone tries to negate it, or you have a goal and someone's like, you can't do that? Because I'm only 17 and I'm hoping to go to grad school, but I have people telling me you can't do that because you're too young, or they try to put me down. I want to know what your opinions are on that.
Charlie?
Oh, I think it's like I was saying earlier, you just disregard what people tell you you cannot do. I say listen to the advice that people like your parents and your teachers and others do, but Pinky and several others have talked about following your passion. There is something that really turns you on, something that really gets you excited, whether it's a profession or whatever. You have to decide what that is and then follow that as your sort of your North Star, your guiding point. But I would say don't pay any attention to people who tell you you can't do things. Set your goals, chart your course, and then do the best you can do to get there. And tell them watch you. There's nothing magic.
Charlie and Ray are two good examples of that. Look what Charlie had to overcome. Couldn't even get an appointment from his congressional delegation in South Carolina to Annapolis. Fortunately did, and you know what happened when he got there? He was promptly elected president of the freshman class at the U.S. Naval Academy. All right. Our brethren from the press, we want to give you a chance to ask anything you want to ask. So do we have a microphone over here? Okay, good. Gentlemen.
Good morning. Carl Hargrove with WFTV Channel 9. Question addressing Artemis. Today is the call to stations for the Artemis 1 wet dress. What does this mean when to finally be so close to launch?
What we do on any new vehicle is we roll it out to the pad and they go through a practice countdown. That's what a wet dress rehearsal is. It's wet because they fuel the vehicle up. They go right through the countdown all the way to T-0, but obviously do not launch, so that they iron out any problems in the countdown. They're doing that Sunday for the final count, and then they will roll the vehicle on that 4.5-mile journey back into the vehicle assembly building. They will make all, and it's stacked. It's vertical on that mobile launch platform. Back in the big building there, the vehicle assembly building, they will then go through their final checks of the rocket, and then likely early to mid-June is the date that it will launch. It will be rolled back out to the pad, and then it goes the count for real. And so that's what wet dress is.
One other question.
Sure.
Axiom 1 launches Wednesday. What does this mean for developing low Earth orbit?
Can I answer that one or try?
Please.
I guess, what do you call it? Full disclosure. I consult with Axiom, and what, in my mind, you know, this is the culmination of what we have tried to do since we retired the shuttle, is demonstrate the fact that it doesn't take a government organization like NASA to operate and do things in low Earth orbit. That industry can do that, and the private sector can do that. You know, it was a big decision to phase out of shuttle and move on to commercial spacecraft like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Axiom and others. It will be a very important mission to show that Mike Lopez Alegria and his crew can actually join the space station contingent of people, conduct experiments just as if they were, you know, long-trained NASA astronauts, and get good results back. So it's a demonstration of what we think we have been pushing all this time. So my hope is that it will be very successful, and you actually won't be able to tell the difference between something that an Axiom crew member does and that a NASA astronaut does, because some of them will be doing the same kinds of experiments and interchanging, because they're actually been trained to become a part of the ISS contingent while they're there for I forget how long it is.
The plan is, over the next 8 years, while we keep the space station, the International Space Station, that we have 16 countries that are participating. The plan is to gradually introduce commercial elements so that when we deorbit the International Space Station after 2030, there will be commercial space stations in low Earth orbit doing the same research and manufacturing and pharmaceuticals that they are experimenting on now. And then NASA can concentrate its efforts higher than low Earth orbit as we venture out, going back to the moon, establishing a moon base, learning how to operate in a hostile environment, and then going with humans to Mars. Okay, next question.
Hi there, I have one. I'm Zenaida Catalo with actually University of Central Florida. You've got a room full of students from across the Central Florida area, mechanical engineers, physics majors, the whole lot. I even spoke to a few art majors that are in the audience. Could you all speak a little bit to what we need to do, or what they need to do, to get ready for those jobs, many of which haven't been envisioned when we do go beyond the moon?
Excellent question.
I'm a big proponent of STEAMed. I don't use the term STEM anymore, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. It completely ignores a significant amount of the population who are vital to what we do. Bob mentioned, the dietitians and the food services people being an integral part of what we do. Try going to space and living for 6 months and not having somebody who's really expert in food management, food planning, food preparation, a spacesuit it's designed by an engineer, but it has to have some aesthetic value. Kids love looking at a SpaceX spacesuit. Why? Because it doesn't look like the old NASA, big bulky spacesuit. So there is a critical need for people in the arts and design who play a vital role. Try doing what we do without somebody who's good in finance or somebody who's good at admin. My brain goes raw when I try to think about schedules. And so the people who took care of all of us when we were in the astronaut office were the secretaries and the executive assistants and the like. And that's a part of the organization. The 18,000 people that Bill Nelson, leads, a teeny segment of that happen to be people who do stuff like we did. And an actual teeny segment of that are engineers and scientists. There are other people in the arts and design that we just can't survive without. So I'm sorry the younger kids are gone, because a lot of them think that because they don't like math and science, they don't have a place in the space program. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We need people who can tell the story. We're not real good storytellers. And unless we can tell our story better, we're not going to convince anybody that going to the moon is important or that going on to Mars is important. We've got to have people who can help put that in words for people who may not buy our act. Everybody doesn't buy our act.
So one other quick thing is that if you think you're done learning when you graduate, you're sorely mistaken, because the world is changing faster than you can imagine, and in order to keep up, you're going to have to keep learning. You're never gonna stop, and you're going to be inventing the new things for other people they're going to have to learn. So you're on a journey now in your institution to get your degree and get out in the real world. Sadly, when you get out in the real world, you're still going to be in school.
In case
Not
you
sadly,
all
actually.
did not know, Charlie Bolden speaks with such authority because he was the administrator of NASA appointed by President Obama and was administrator for 8 years. Okay, we've got our other member of the press here. What's your question?
Hi, Benjamin Booker from Spectrum News. Just piggybacking after what you've been saying, do you ever foresee a time when journalists are needed in space?
Now.
Absolutely. We want every walk of life to be represented in space. And we want to tell that story that you've heard told today of what it's like to look back at Earth. And we are destined as a people to explore. That is in our DNA. We as Americans have always had a frontier. We're always exploring that frontier. We don't want to give that up. If we ever do, we are defying who we are as a people. And thus, we will continue to explore. And that exploration is way beyond the old phrase, the sky is the limit. It's the heavens are the limit. We are literally getting ready to go to Mars with humans in approximately 2040. It's one thing to go 3 days to the moon and learn to live in a hostile environment there that's 1/6 gravity. It's another thing to go months and months to a planet that has an atmosphere, 1% of Earth's atmosphere. We just made oxygen, by the way, on the surface of Mars with the Perseverance rover from 1% atmosphere. That is a 1/3 gravity. So to go that far distant, to be able to survive, to learn how to adapt, and be able to return safely is quite a feat. We're going to try to do that. And where this goes in the future, let your imaginations run wild. Is it colonies in space on another body? Is it a colony in space that is created and that is floating out there in the vacuum of space? Who knows where it's going? But we're going to keep exploring. Okay, any final comments from any of you guys? Mr. CDR, you close us out.
Bill, thank you so very much for pulling this all together. And the things that came out today have been a learning experience for me as well. I'm going to remember this. Like Charlie said, we're going to continue, or Pinky said, we're going to continue to learn as we go. I'm still learning. I'm kind of old, but I'm still learning. And, Mr. Administrator, Mr. Senator, Mr. Crew Member, Mr. Good Friend, thank you for pulling this all together.
So, Mary Palmer, the president of the Philharmonic, would you tell us about the details on the performance, the concert?
Yes, and weren't they incredible? Yeah, we all learned so much and feel inspired, and it has been great to have the energy of all of you here, and I can feel you just soaking up all the learning that we've done. So thank you for being with us.
attention, please. This is a very special concert. For one, we haven't done a Springs concert in 3 years, but we also have some very, very special guests with us. And I'd like to have Senator Bill Nelson introduce them to you.
The Orlando Phil is the best. So think back about 36 years ago. All of us had flown in space. The mission just completed, headed by our astronaut commander, Captain Robert Gibson. We had landed on the 18th of January, 1986. 10 days later, Challenger launches and blows up 10 miles high. And it shook all of us to the core. It shook the nation to the core. And so naturally, the astronaut office was just so down in the dumps, and this went on and on because we had lost our friends to human mistakes. And so they said, we've got to get out of this funk. And one of the astronauts said, let's have a 1950s sock hop, and let's play some music. And suddenly they started finding that some of our crew could really play. And then they reached out and they found a guy who had a set of drums, and they went to Stevie, Dr. Steve Hawley, PhD in astronomy, and they said, I'll go buy a keyboard. And they formed the first astronaut band and named themselves Max Q, which is the maximum dynamic pressure that a rocket senses as it is going uphill as it accelerates. Max Q, it makes a lot of noise, and you hope it's all syncopated.
But no music.
So, you are going to have the original Max Q, and I've never seen them intimidated until tonight playing with you.
All right, good evening, everyone. So the Max Q Band is going to play the Sgt. Pepper's arrangement at the top of the show, so let's begin with that.
May I introduce to you the astronaut
sang out of tune, would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. What do I do when my love is away? 'Cause it never is to be alone. How do I feel by the end of the day? Are you sad because you're on your own? No, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. I need somebody to love. I want somebody to love. Would you believe in love at first sight? Yes, I'm certain that it happens all the time. What do you see when you turn out the light? I can't tell you, but I know it's mine. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. I need somebody to love. Could it be anybody? I want somebody to love. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. A little help from my
We hope you have enjoyed the show. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We're sorry, but it's time to go. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We'd like to thank you once again.
Can we quit now? Awesome. Feel good?
The orchestra multiplies it by about 10. Fantastic, y'all. Way to go.